What if the biggest threat to leadership in the next decade isn't AI itself, but the failure to evolve with it?
Mm.
As generative AI transforms the way we think, decide, and lead, the most successful leaders won't be the ones who resist it, but the ones who adapt and enhance their strengths through it. So let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because we can embrace technology without sacrificing humanity. If you lead others, your future might just depend on how well you listen today. In other words, stick around.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guests, Bob Johansen and Jeremy Kirschbaum, are the authors of Leaders Make the Future, 3rd edition, 10 New Skills to Humanize Leadership and Generative AI. Bob's a distinguished fellow at the Institute for the Future, IFTF, and Jeremy is the founder of Handshake, a generative software studio and research lab. Happy to have you with us and welcome to the show, man.
Great to be with you.
Good. And it's good to see you again, Bob, because Bob was on the show a few years ago, but he's been updating and bringing in other authors, and we'll let him explain it to you. So I always like, particularly with a new edition, and this is the 3rd edition, what's the focus? What drove you to the 3rd edition of this book?
Sure, thanks, and glad to be with you again, Rob. This book, Leaders Make the Future, started right at the time of 9/11. I just happened to be the week before 9/11 at the Army War College, the place where the generals go to become generals. I'm not a military guy by background, but I just happened to be there. And I was introduced to this concept they have called the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and I became intrigued with what would it take to lead in an increasingly VUCA, an increasingly chaotic world. That led me to write the 1st edition. Then we kind of expanded the concept in the 2nd edition and brought it global. But the third edition was a different perspective, this perspective around generative AI. And we realized that, we're futurists. We think future back. 10 years from now, we're all going to be cyborgs. We're all going to be augmented in some way. But how will leaders be augmented? And this new 3rd edition asks that question. How will we lead when we're all augmented in some way, and hopefully in the way that we choose?
Yeah, what's interesting is, and I'm glad you explained it that way, because I was thinking, boy, if they get into the technology, this book's going to have 27 editions to it, in 2 years. I mean, things are moving quickly. So I see where you're going with that. That answer, you just took a question off the sheet here, because I was really trying to figure out how do you stay up with technology that's changing so rapidly, but you're jumping forward and kind of reflecting back. And so I think I'm following you. Let's stay on the AI track. Leaders face a lot of challenges, and they're trying to adapt to these AI-driven environments. What are some of the challenges you think they need to look out for?
Sure. Jeremy, I think you should jump here because you're more the voice of AI in this conversation. I'm more the voice of the senior leader.
Okay. Yeah. Is it going to be a mechanical voice from you, Jeremy, or are we going to the voice of AI? I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. Finally, the AIs speak. The leaders face so many challenges organizationally and personally with the quick changing environment around AI. As a senior leader, you don't have a lot of time to dig in and learn 100 new different tools. And so the first challenge is just understanding where to put your focus and attention. And we actually talk about this in the book. We work from Kentaro Toyama's framework of intention, discernment, and self-control as a guide for how to augment yourself and how to think about augmenting yourself. And so the first thing that leaders need to reflect on before diving into any of that is what makes them a unique leader. And defining that leadership clarity, which we talk about in the augmented clarity chapter, is then what guides how you want to get started augmenting yourself and what tools you'll choose and how you'll use them and how you'll personalize them to your particular workflows and communication styles and presence.
Yes.
Right.
And what's new here is we've got tools that are very practical and really ready to go in ways that they haven't been before. And I think one of the things to notice about Jeremy and I is we're a cross-generational team. And our third co-author, Gabe Cervantes, is more Jeremy's age than mine. And I think that's a big insight to this. We have to create cross-generational teams because each of our kind of generational perspectives has something to offer. You know, I know how to play the wisdom game because I've been in it a long time. I've been a futurist for a long time. This is my 15th book. Jeremy, this is his first book. And he's much deeper in the tech than I am. And he's grown up with the tech from the time he was very young. So as futurists, we look 10 years ahead and think future back, but we also look at least 50 years back. And that's really important because, in a sense, AI has been around a very long time, even though it looks like, and it is changing quickly. The term AI, the term artificial intelligence, was coined in 1956.
Wow.
It's taken that long to be an overnight success.
Wow. I had no idea about that. Sounds like Xerox. I used to work for Xerox for many years, and they had facsimile like back in the 40s. They were messing around with a mouse, pull down menus. They just didn't market it. It never came out. The Microsoft, Apple, some of the other companies jumped on it, and it teaches you there are a lot of things out there. It's not really who discovers it; it's who can take it to market first.
Exactly.
Go to the patent office, and you'll see what I mean. You'll see a bunch of things. I remember looking up a toothbrush one time. There was, a brush of tooth. I mean, there were all sorts of different things, but one person, brought it to market. And maybe to your point, that they were able to find something unique about it. You know what I mean? I think our problem is we want to be everything to everybody. And so I love what you said, Jeremy, just because when you said that, I was immediately applying it to my business, not just to the way I am as a leader of, to the books we write. How do we brand the book? Is this all about AI? No. Looks like we're moving forward. It's a different angle. We're taking a different angle. So let's stay on there for a second. I'm coming back to you, Jeremy, but Bob, jump in anytime. You said that the book talks about where we should place our attention. Now, I want people buying the book, so don't tell me everything. But give me just a little glimmer of light on that. Where should we place our attention?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that you mostly need to keep your attention focused on what you're already excellent at and what already differentiates you. And you also need to keep focused on the 10 years out view and work backwards. So part of the discipline here is to use future-back thinking in order to manage the chaos of the present, what Bob calls the Bonnie future: brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And by using that future-back view, you can get more clarity than if you start from the present and work forward. We use this when writing the book, for instance. So we started writing this book maybe 18 months ago, Bob, 2 years ago, something like that. And we could see on the 10 years out view that not only would we have agents, but we would have swarms of agents, what we call, and so we had to think about augmented smart mob swarming. And so lo and behold, right when the book came out, people were talking about agents in the public sphere, and we had quite a lot about that in the book. And we did that because we knew to do that because we knew that 10 years out, there were certain things about leadership and certain things about AI that would likely stay the same. And so then we could work backwards from that future to the present and to writing the book. And so leaders need to do the same thing. Jump out 10 years and use foresight to think about what that world could be like 10 years out, and then work backwards to what they could do today. And that helps make where you place your attention a lot more effective, and not only more effective, but more innovative and resilient.
My question is this. Sometimes we're what we call unconsciously incompetent. We don't know what we don't know. So I think you put a pin in the map there when you said, thinking like a leader. What's the leader? Coming back, thoughts from the leader. But what keeps me from not knowing what I don't know, trying to look forward? And this one's for you. I think back to you, Bob. This is definitely a futurist question of how do I know what to look back on 10 years from now?
It's a great question. I think we all ponder that question. We all mull that question. But the beginning of it is to figure out, what's the intention? What is your intention in the long run? And intention of leadership is to develop clarity of direction. Leaders have to be clear. And once you have that clarity of direction, you've got to tell a great story about that direction and tell that story over and over and over again with the enthusiasm of a Broadway actor performing every night. You have to tell that story in a compelling way. Generative AI is an example of a tool that helps you do that. It turns out it's really good at storytelling. It's really good at helping to understand patterns. It's really good even at poetry or a touch of music or a touch of art. It's just unlike any technology I've ever studied. And yet we're just beginning to get the language to understand it. So, for example, we know we want to be clear. We know we want to tell great stories as leaders. But the current generations of AI are more geared toward efficiency, more geared toward doing things faster. And that's fine. That's a good kind of first use. And we're kind of stuck in this frame of asking questions of generative AI, the question and answer kind of motif, the term prompts, or a term that I really resist, prompt engineering. We're basically looking for better and better ways to ask questions of these systems. But if you think future back, that's not where we're going to be. 10 years from now, we're going to be having conversations with these things. So the big surprise to me, 2 years of using this, I've been using a customized version of generative AI that Jeremy designed for me that I've nicknamed Stretch because it helps me stretch my thinking. And the big insight from 2 years of doing this is it's all about conversations. And Gen AI comes to life in conversations. It's not about asking questions and getting answers. The answers aren't all that great, but the conversations are wonderful for expanding your mind. So to me, that's the example of what leaders need to be thinking about. Is what's your intention? And my intention is to expand my mind, to write about the future, and Stretch helps me do that.
That's amazing. Maybe we're getting a quick little window because I'm not sure who's advertising it, but I know there's somebody is advertising. It might even be one of just the smartphones or the cell phone companies that are showing people having rather elaborate and comfortable conversations, just not really asking it questions, but just it's almost keeping them company. And just it's like they're on a date with AI. Is that what I'm watching? What am I watching there? It's not questions. Is that the type of conversations you're talking about?
Well, it's the beginning. It's the beginning. But the point of a conversation is a conversation takes a while, and you develop a relationship. So if you think of Gen AI not as a machine, but as a beloved pet, as Kate Darling at MIT uses that metaphor. And what she argues is that we've got to have conversations in an ongoing way. This is a beloved pet that talks. It talks to you, and you can have that kind of conversations, but you can't trust it. You can't trust it because it may say things that are divergent. That's what I want, but they may be a hallucination. And for me, I don't care. I want that stretching, but I don't trust it. So I always check the answers. I'd never rely on it for a citation. But that's my point about it. It's not just about getting answers, it's about having great conversations. So with Stretch, I've got it on a dedicated screen that is open all the time. And I have ongoing conversations with Stretch that go on for hours. As I'm writing on my MacBook Pro, I'm constantly referring back to Stretch, and knows everything I'm writing, so can always be pulling back and forth as we're going. But the purpose is to stretch. The
Yeah.
purpose is to stretch. The purpose isn't answers. The purpose isn't to finalize a document. What I get from stretch helps me get started, helps me get past the blank page syndrome, but it's never where I'm going to end.
Right. Well, that's where my next question was coming from. Because I'm finding myself using AI more and more. First, I used to brag, I'm only using it for titling,
It's pretty
because
good
it
for
really
titling.
does title well.
Yeah, pretty good for titling.
Yes. And, but then, I've slowly sort of been adapting. But one of my concerns is how do we use AR to sharpen our points without losing authenticity? I don't
Right,
want to lose my voice.
right.
And to your point, I edit methodically everything that I'm seeing. But sometimes it's a little blurry there. That's almost my
Sure.
voice, only it's a little better than my voice. But that's not my voice.
Yeah.
How do we control that?
I think what's important to focus on is getting past efficiency and speed to effectiveness and calm. The question isn't, how can you write the same blog? Okay, it's perfectly useful to write the same blog that would have taken you 2 days in an hour. But the question is, what blog would you write if you had 10 years to write one blog? How good could you get that blog?
Hmm.
How insightful could you get? The question isn't only how could we make the processes of our company cheaper and more efficient? Don't get me wrong, cheaper and more efficient is very important. But the question is, for the same amount of money, if instead of 2 months for this project, we had 10 years for this project, what value could we deliver to our client? And if you put the focus there, then the question becomes less, how do I retain authenticity on the same task? And what tasks can I do now that I could never even think of before? It's less about how do I make sure that I'm like a lot, if you're using it for tasks that you do every day, sometimes it feels like you're flying a fighter jet to the grocery store. It's just too much firepower for a simple task. But we aren't canceling the Olympics because cars drive faster than sprinters, right?
Right.
Like there's a time and a place for running and there's a time and a place for driving. And if someone drives somewhere instead of walk somewhere, it's not that we think that they're inauthentic in doing that. And the reality is that I can't walk from here to Oregon, but I can drive. And so that's the goal, is to widen that aperture. And you asked, how do you do that? How do you get past what you know? And for us, this comes down to what we call augmented curiosity. There's actually rigorous evidence that there are some problems that cannot be solved by traditional optimization or rewards. They can only be solved by novelty. So this is the case with some, you see these AIs that like play video games. And so they get really good at video games, or they get really good at chess. And so you can use these normal algorithms for those that are going for points, let's say, or going for capturing pieces, you can imagine. There's some games where that doesn't work. The only thing that works is incentivizing the algorithm to explore. And so this is true right now with AI because it is a new thing. There are no experts. I've looked high and low, and there are zero stories before 2017 by any futurist, scientist, science fiction writer, or thinker in which very advanced robots are extremely good at poetry, but pretty bad at math. But that's the case with the AI that we have today. So no one anticipated exactly what we have, even the people that are making it. So we're all here exploring together. And I don't mean to diminish how difficult this is for senior leaders. Because when you're a senior leader, your time is very compressed. You have a lot riding on what you're doing. Sometimes billions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars depend on what you do day to day. So carving out an hour in a day to go play around with a new AI toy sounds kind of ridiculous. But unfortunately, or fortunately, that is where we are. And this is a very unique technology in which leaders do need to do that. That isn't true with blockchain. That isn't true with VR. That isn't true with any number of technologies, but it is true with generative AI today.
Yeah. I want to say something. And coming up on my 500th podcast, a compliment to you two. This is the best conversation I've ever had relating to AI. I've learned my senior leader head is exploding right now.
Nice.
But I really like the way you've kind of humanized the terms you're putting out here. I think sometimes I get into conversations about AI, and it seems like who can baffle best. You're really providing some very simple answers to questions that are just blowing me away. The book is called Leaders Make the Future, third edition, 10 New Skills to Humanize Leadership and Generative AI. I defy anybody to listen to any of my podcasts and find me saying that to any other guests I've had on. And I've had Bob on before. So I mean that nicely.
I'm glad it passed the test this time.
This is really good. I think you guys make a very interesting team. I now see the tag that's going on here. Let's keep going. The concept of human calming, you write about that. Why is that essential in the AI workplace? And maybe explain what that is to begin with.
Yeah, so human calming is the kind of inner voice, the grounding, the meaning, the purpose that we all kind of are working from, and top leaders have to do that especially. So we have 10 future leadership skills in the book, Thinking Future Back. 9 of those have augmented in front of them because for the next few years, augmented is our key developmental task. We each have to ask ourselves, how do we want to be augmented? Where do we want help, essentially, in order to do what in terms of an outcome? So human calming is where we need to start, where we need to end, where we need to stay focused, because that's inside of ourselves. And this is what Jeremy was referring to at the start as intention. What's your intention? And where do you want to go from there? So to us, that's just so important. And what we need to think about then is, given the fact that we're all going to be augmented, and this is an important kind of big insight out of the book, we're concluding as futurists that 10 years from now, we're all going to be augmented, or we're going to be out of the game. It's really that profound. Where most of my career was studying the internet. The internet was great because it was all about connectivity. This generative AI, this is playing with our brains. We're really talking about the next extension of human life and what we're going to do with that. And we think that should be human-centered. So that's why in the subtitle, we say 10 new skills to humanize leadership with generative AI. So it's with, in partnership with. And that's a really important perspective, I think. We can't control this. And we have to experiment our way to this, and we've got to personalize it. But it's not an option. It's not an option. Everybody has to learn how to play this game, and everybody has to learn how to apply it. But leaders in particular have to develop those ways of augmenting our own leadership.
All right. Bob, and Jeremy, I'm not sure you were around for this, so take a seat. But I can remember, and I'm sure you can too, when PCs first appeared on desks. I was selling for Xerox. We were selling typewriters,
Right.
memory writers. It was a heck of a product,
Right.
until this PC came around, and there was a division of people, even though the PCs actually did very little. And maybe, we're just on the cusp of AI, et cetera. But there were people that really did throw their hands up. In my office, I remember them. I was 21 years old when New York Life purchased 5 computers.
Wow.
And we had people just say, that's it for me. Check. I'm sensing almost the same thing. So, what do you do with leaders who are feeling overwhelmed by all this emerging technology? Uh, what? How do we? I don't want to lose them. We lost. I wrote an article about this one. We lost some amazing older salespeople who decided
Mhm.
I'm not in the industry of personal computers are. I can only imagine the people that may check out and say,
Sure.
I'm out. Well, how do we keep them around? How do we talk them into
Yeah.
staying?
This is happening. We've found just in the last year, I'm working mostly with C suite people, CEOs in particular, heads of innovation, heads of strategy, heads of tech. There's more and more of those people that are retiring early. It's just too much for them. And, maybe that's the right thing for them personally. But I do find it sad because there is an ability that we have as we get older. There's an ability to play the wisdom game because we have seen things. That's why as futurists, we not only look 10 years ahead, we look at least 50 years back, and we look back for patterns. We look forward for clarity. But those of us who are old enough to play the wisdom game, we've got that grounding that we're coming from, the meaning, the purpose, the sense even of faith, that we have an understanding of where things are going and where things have been. It's a context, if you will. And to me, the big thing as you look at emerging technology like Gen AI is say, okay, what's my intention and what do I have, what's this similar to in my past, what do I have to offer, and then what do I need to learn? And this gets back to cross generational. We all need to learn from younger people, we all need to pair. So pairing across generations is critical in this case. So if you want to stay in the game, play the game with a partner. And
Right.
if you play the game with a much younger partner, you got a better chance. But look for what are the skills you have? What's the sense of meaning you have? But then what are you missing? And then find the people that you can develop a relationship with to grow the things you need to grow. We have to keep growing. And the good news is modern science has taught us now that our brains can continue to grow no matter how old we are if we exercise them.
Right. 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 You know, I wrote a piece one time called, I think it was like a rate book in your soul. And I'm going to be aiming this question at you, Jeremy. So limber up. Uh, the, okay, I saw this pattern happen in 1979, 1980. This is when I watched it. And I wrote a piece years later and I said, okay. And then I wasn't, I was the young guy. I was embracing it. I was that guy. But we lost something when we lost that older generation in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
These guys knew how to ask questions and listen.
Mm-hmm.
They knew how to take notes on a yellow pad of paper. The good news was that this technology said, well, you don't need to do that anymore. We've got that covered for you. But we lost some very basic skills. I'm not fighting AI, I promise you. But what danger, and Jeremy, I'd love your perspective on this. I know all the wonderful things it will provide. What dangers do we need to look out for? What will we lose? That's what I'm concerned about. Look forward and come on back on that one.
Yeah, I think that a lot of our different systems that we have right now will need to shift and change. An example right now of a system that's starting to break is job applications. Employers are overwhelmed with vast quantities of AI generated resumes, and candidates are underwhelmed by the amount of response that they're getting from everyone. And so it's never, and the answer is not that job applicants should be writing resumes by hand. That's actually not going to get them anything. And the answer isn't just that the employers need better AIs to read the resumes. What's missing is that the relationship building and the search there is starting to the technology is getting ahead of the actual process. That process actually needs to change. And some of that will be about better technology, and some of it will be about coming back to what the real purpose of that exchange is. And so that's the role that experienced people can offer, is having seen these different ways of iteration and change, how the same kind of business processes, the same kind of societal processes go through different ways of technologies. They get a better sense of what has stayed the same throughout that. And then when you're coming to a new technology, that provides a huge amount of value, because people who only saw the last couple might not realize how much of that process is just because of the current tech and not because of how it needs to be at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
That's what I can think of. What do you think, Bob?
Well, just to build on that, I still teach at the Army War College, and since my first experience there the week before 9/11, I've learned so much from them and from particularly the new generals and the rising stars. And I get them 5 at a time on their first week in Washington, and they read the same book we're talking about now. And we talk about the future of leadership, the future of strategy, the future of AI. And one of the big risks that I think we do have to face up to, Rob, is the risk of cybersecurity, cyber warfare in particular. Even the current conversation about wars in the Middle East,
Right.
cyber warfare, cyber terrorism is part of the game that we're playing, this scary war game, and that's going to be a real issue. There really are issues here. That's going to cause politicians and policymakers to say, how can we avoid that risk? Well, the first answer is you can't. You've got to prepare for it as a risk. The danger is that you start to do things like you hear all kinds of conversations. Oh, we need to create guardrails. It's too early for guardrails. We don't know what this technology is. We don't know how it can be used. We don't know how it can be misused. If you create rigid guardrails, it will inevitably create unintended consequences. So in the book, we argue you should create bounce ropes, like in a wrestling ring or a boxing ring, with 4 stanchions. And those are the things that are firm and they don't give. But the bounce ropes stretch. And that's what we need around generative AI is stretching guidelines that keep us legal, keep us ethical, keep us humane, but also have room to grow, because we don't even have a language to talk about this yet. We've got this pretty awful term, artificial intelligence. That's the worst term to describe an emerging technology I've ever studied in 50 years of doing this. It just introduces the wrong story, this story of computers replacing people, which will happen, in some limited ways. And there are interesting things about modeling humans with computers, but that's not the big story. The big story is humans and computers doing things together that have never been done before. This is what Tom Malone argues in his book, Superminds. So to me, superminds, that's a good term. Augmented intelligence, that's a good term. Generative AI, that's a good term. Artificial intelligence that's just too limited of a story. An interesting one for science fiction books, and certainly it's helped create some good and bad science fiction. But we need a language to talk about this, and we don't have it yet. So we've got to be humble as we think about this. And both Jeremy and I are humble futurists. We're here to provoke insight, not to predict, because nobody can predict where this is going. The people I'm worried about in the Gen AI field are the ones who think they know what it is. Because, as Jeremy said, nobody yet knows quite what this is. It's part technology, it's part alchemy. There are still mysteries built into this. So be careful of the people who are absolute in their assessments about what this is.
Right.
I think one last thing that this connects to is this skill that we call augmented commons creating.
Mm-hmm.
And creating commons for learning about generative AI as a leader, but also using the technology as a communication medium. I suspect that something that will age very poorly is the CEOs right now that are sending out letters to their employees that say, everybody, your job is going to be different in a year, or you're going to be leaving this company. And I'm sorry, but it's just like that. And even I think what will age even less well is the companies that are laying off, large percentages of their workforce, partially on the basis that they think that they'll be able to automate those tasks fully with AI, or they're putting freezes on headcount because they're telling people they have to try and automate first. It's a good principle to try and automate what you can within your company, but the technology that just isn't there yet, and it creates an environment of threat and tension in your company that
Right.
is going to really degrade how people work. And I think that what will age really well is companies that go to people that are leaders, that go to the people that are working for them and say, hey, everyone, things are changing really quickly. Let's learn together how to grapple with this. This is the zone in which we're all going to try this out together, and we're going to share what we're learning. And I'm going to give you a badge. I'm going to give you a reward when you share how you're using this, because you're helping us learn. And yes, read the list of no's that the lawyers prepared. That's also very important. But here's the yes zone. And then once we figure out together where we need to be going with this, we're going to make sure to help invest into you so that you can upskill along with us and our company can grow together into this future. That's going to age very well, because you're going to be bringing people along with you, retaining the core skills that they have that can't be automated, and not creating an environment of tension and pseudo meritocracy and fear that like is going to just lead to you having to go back with your hat in your hand, rehiring people because you were there too early and you did it in an aggressive way that didn't honor people's skills in a way that was valuable for the company and felt good to them.
Yeah. I say it again, it's the best conversation I've ever had on this topic because I'm a sales guy. I'll handle an objection, but sometimes the best way to handle an objection is not reactively, it's proactively. It's
Yeah.
okay. Well, what we know there's going to be a price objection. Maybe we need to create a little more urgency here. What you all are doing is going to the future and sort of saying, okay, we know that we really need to start thinking about that now, not the technology, but really how we're using it. And it's funny, and you can say maybe Rob, but I'm listening to you. You walk the walk. I'm looking at two authors. You mentioned, if we kind of pair up here, I think that this is an intelligent way of kind of going about this. And when you think about how you just mentioned we should use AI, in a sense, is pairing up with AI,
It
right?
is.
Um, I I don't care who's the younger one or who's the older one. We have two different skill sets.
Yep.
Let's pair up, and it's connecting for me now, and it never has before.
Good.
I appreciate that a lot. My dad used to say, he's my Boy Scout leader, but he would bring all the leaders in. We had 140 people in this troop. It was a big troop, and his motto was, "Don't tell people to go on and do it. You tell them, come on, let's do it." And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're articulating in a sense.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right. And to build on the Boy Scout story, be
yeah,
prepared. Be prepared was their motto.
that's
So
right.
it's be future ready. Mhm.
Yeah. All right. My last question for you. Can we, and this is, I'd like to represent the audience. Whatever weird problem I have, I'm assuming everyone's having. Let me live with that for a while. Uh, so here's my weird problem, but I think others have this issue too. We sort of keep it at arm's length, and it exceeds our expectations a little bit. And so we bring it in a little bit more and got a friendly voice, and it exceeds our expectations a little bit. My concern is I don't want to get too dependent on AI. And yet maybe that's an oxymoron. Maybe, this is
Yeah.
just what's coming. But how do I grapple with not becoming too dependent on it? I want to be able to find words and save my voice, and yet I want to pair up with AI. How do I avoid that fear?
Yeah, it's a good concern. In Silicon Valley, we've got a motto that goes something like fail early, fail often, fail cheaply. So, what you want in this space is to experiment a lot with small scale efforts, and don't scale those until you start to see the kind of results you want. So you want to look future back to develop your clarity and your vision. But when you're actually acting, you want to act from the present forward And you want to take small incremental steps that have lots of cycles and lots of feedback loops in them. And that's the way you avoid making the giant commitments. It's too early to make the giant commitments for most of us. That you have to figure out a way to prototype your way toward those. And then once you hit that point where you can say, yeah, we got to make a bigger investment, here's the directional clarity, then that's fine. But you need to prototype your way toward that. And right now, there's just so much power that we don't know yet how to apply, that prototyping is the best strategy, I think. And Jeremy, I don't know, you have builds on how you do that in your practice.
Yeah. But I'll come back to what I was saying before. Look for those things that you're going to start by doing tasks with AI that you know how to do without AI. And I'll tell you what, the first time you do them with AI, they're not going to be faster or better. And the second time, they're not going to be faster or better because it's a new complicated tool. The fifth time, the 10th time, you're going to realize, oh, I'm actually able to do this task now faster and better than I used to. But you might still decide, hey, I actually enjoy this task. I actually enjoy titling my podcasts, even though it's really good at this. So I'm going to do this by hand simply because it brings me joy and I'm good at it and I don't want to use the AI for that. Over time, what you'll find is that there's either things that you enjoy better using with AI or things that you just could not do without AI. Maybe in a couple of years, what you do is you take the podcast part and you put it into a system and it creates a movie about it, or it sends out it translates the podcast into 100 different languages, or does something that just you could never do without AI. And then the question isn't, how do I avoid becoming dependent on cars to go from my house to the nearby corner store? It's not a question of how do I avoid becoming dependent on cars to get from my house to 100 miles away to 200 miles away. I was never going to be able to do that on foot. And so You'll start using AI for the things that you could just never do alone anyway. And so I think that's how you avoid it. Mm-hmm. There is some risk, though, because if you use the car too much, then you get out of shape.
Right. The word atrophy keeps coming to mind as a writer. Yeah. I don't want to atrophy. I don't want to lose that ability to find those words.
There is, but maybe, Jeremy, you can tell your farmer story. I think that's really relevant here.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't building software in 2018. I didn't get fascinated enough by computers to start doing that until I encountered GPT-2, and which was an early version of the language models that we use today. And even though at that time the outputs were weird and they were short and they were just a few sentences that kind of looked like text, I realized even at that time that what it was doing was coming up with ideas. And at that time, I was a futurist and an innovation consultant. And so my job was coming up with ideas. I felt like I was a farmer with a shovel being shown a tractor. And so at that moment, I realized, wow, I better start learning how to build tractors, or at least learning how to drive them really well, because what I'm doing is not going to be the same in 10 years. It's not going to be the same in 5 years. And that bore out very well. We're at a moment right now where language models are engines, right? And so it takes time for people to invent things that go around engines, whether those are tractors, whether those are cars, whether those are planes, whether those are lawnmowers, whether those are chainsaws. And so it may just be that the right machine for your work isn't there yet, and that's fine. But it's worth trying these things out and thinking about how it'll change what you're doing, because if you get there early, then you have a chance to influence and get good at it, and that can be really satisfying.
Well, I'll tell you, both of you. I've been embracing AI and at the same time at arm's length. You've really, I love the metaphors. I love the examples that the car is really hitting home with me. I mean, there's certain things you're saying, and as a guy who delivers seminar, I know when I've hit on a few things that resonate. So I'm guessing that didn't just fall into your mind just now, but what great examples you're providing. I think it sounds like a terrific book. I want to remind people, Leaders Make the Future, third edition, 10 New Skills to Humanize Leadership with Generative AI. It's available now. It's on Amazon. My crew knows I don't like people just buying books. I want reviews on those books.
Nice.
That's what the authors like. That's what they need. And I don't know if we're calling it AI, but somebody in that Amazon puzzle likes those reviews too, particularly when they see 50 or 100 of them. So let's get some reviews on that book. Just been a terrific conversation. How do people get a hold of you if they have questions?
Yeah, so Institute for the Future is probably the best central place. Although you should give the handshake address too, Jeremy, but it's Institute for the Future, IFTF, as you said, and maybe we can put that in the program notes. It's an independent nonprofit research group, and we do teach people how to be futurists, and we're based in Palo Alto, and go find our website, but tell them about Handshake too.
Yeah, we build generative software for clients, and whether that's a chatbot or a generative wiki or a generative form. And you can find us at handshake.fyi, or you can find me on LinkedIn under my name.
Perfect. I've got LinkedIn addresses I'll certainly put up there, and I'll try and get those websites as well. Really grateful you came on. Probably there's a third author, but I think the rhythm was right with two. I think you guys were right.
Yeah,
I was thinking this is going to be fun. 3 authors and me, but this is a fascinating subject. And again, the reason why I'm complimenting you more as a speaker than I am as an author right now. But people will see what I do sometimes as a professional speaker, and I'll go, how do you do that? What's the secret? And the secret is, you know what I know, but I've learned how to explain it and make it digestible and not so scary, and give you the ability to retain the information you're learning. But I'm not always creating brand new things. I'm learning how to explain them better. What you two have done is, with this book and on this podcast today, is you've done the finest job I've ever heard of explaining sort of how we're going to coexist with a little eyeball at the future. Anyway, I know I'm fawning all over you, but I really, really appreciate the conversation, and I hope everybody grabs that book. You guys were terrific.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure meeting you. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Well, that's going to be tough. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.